Hi, and thanks so much for joining me again. I'm Susan from So Peaceful, and if you've been in one of my classes already this year, or you'll be joining me in one of the classes at a Craft Alive event this year, you might be working on an applique piece that's got a little teacup on it. The video that I'm going to do now will show you how to make that. So if you don't get a chance to finish it off and you forget everything that I say in the class, then you'll be able to come back and look at the video. Or if you're not able to make a craft fair and you'd like to just purchase a kit from our website and follow along with me with the video, you can do that also. We have it available in a range of colours. So without further ado, I'll get started on things that you might find helpful to know to work along with me. It's a little breezy here in Brizzy at the moment, and I've already got things blowing away, so I've tried to weigh them down where I can. So when you've got the kit, and what you'll find in there is a pre-printed piece of applique paper. This is the Hugs and Kisses applique paper, and it's flat, what I'd call flat on one side, and shiny or a little bit slippery on the other side. With this piece, you'll notice that I've printed on the flat side. Now, the advantage of these sheets of applique paper is that they come in size that you can pop through the printer, and that's what I've done for this pattern that I've made for you with the teacup. You do need to be careful putting it through the printer. I find if I don't get the paper lined up exactly perfectly beautifully, it can jam. So, don't put a lot of sheets through at a time. Just be really careful. But it does work, and when it works really well. So what we need to do first of all is to cut out, just on that printing thing, I do find that if you've got a printer where the paper goes down rather than across, it will feed the applique paper through better if you've got one of those drop feed models of printers. So what we need to do then is cut out. It is a little bit easier to tell which side is which when I print it on the flat side, but it is important that as we use the paper that we remember that the flat side is the side that will sit on top, and the shiny side or the slippery side is the one that will get pressed onto your fabric. So a bit later on we want to make sure that that's not happening the wrong way around. So what we're going to do is cut out on these lines. The fabric that I've given you is all pretty well patterned, but if you had a white fabric, for example, you might like to trim a little bit more of that line back. As you cut out your paper, I want you to think about just trying to hold the scissors in one spot and moving the paper around the scissors. Now, it's not something that I learned when I was doing Kindergarten 101, cutting out, but it's something that I've picked up in more recent times, and it'll help you get a straighter line and smoother curves, which is important. Because when we go to glue our fabric down to the paper, we'll be folding the fabric over those lines, so it is important that you try and stick to the line and keep your lines as straight as possible. So just go ahead and cut all your pieces of fabric out then. And once you've done that, you'll work through the fabric that I've given you, and you'll be pressing, as I said, the slippery side of the paper to the wrong side of your fabric. Now, I've got these pieces glued on. Generally, the florally piece that I've given you, I would choose for your cup. If you've got a plainer piece, it might be the inside of the cup, and a coordinating piece for your saucer. With your two circles, if you keep in mind, the larger circle is your saucer, the smaller, or it's an oval rather than a circle, but the smaller oval is for the inside of the cup. So just don't get those mixed up, and if you want to change your fabric around, that's not a problem at all. The only thing to bear in mind when you press with your iron your paper onto your fabric for your applique is that you need to leave 1/4 of an inch all the way around. So where I've got these two pieces of paper, for example, pressed onto the same fabric, you'll find that I can cut 1/4 of an inch in between them. So make sure you're 1/4 of an inch in from the outside edges and you've got enough to turn over. Once you've got that done, then you cut out around those pieces with roughly 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now, when you've got some of these pieces that have got quite sharp curves, particularly the saucer and the inside of the cup, even the handle, 1/4 of an inch you'll find is really too big, and you'll have to go down to about 1/8 of an inch. Try not to squeeze anything less than 1/8 of an inch into your seam allowance, and the reason for that is because we're going to turn the seam allowance over the paper. Now, if you have too short a seam allowance, what you'll find is that it will fray, it will pop out, you know, of the edge. So we want to make sure it's down in there nice and snugly. But where you know, sometimes you can get away with 1/4 of an inch nicely, you might find it needs to be a little bit less than that, particularly on the sharp curves. Now, we only need to clip on the inward curve. So I've got one here at the top of my cup. The other one will be inside the handle. And what I'm going to do, just so I can get a nice smooth curve, is just clip. Now, I'm not clipping all the way up to the paper because, again, I don't want it to fray. So if I just stop 1 or 2 threads before I get to the paper, I'm just going to snip it in 3 spots into that curve, and when I fold that over, that will help me to get a nice smooth curve around the edge of the cup. So with our handle, again, this is where we will need to be a lot skimpier than 1/4 of an inch, because what we'll find is when we start gathering the fabric around the paper, oh, I'm blowing away, when we start gathering the fabric around the paper, it will be much easier to gather if we don't have too much fabric. Now, the other thing we need to keep in mind when I talk about folding your fabric over the paper, there are a couple of places where we won't need to fold that up. And one of those is at each end of the handle, and that's because the handle will tuck in underneath the cup. So you don't need to fold the end under. It's only where we've got, you know, the edges that will sit outside, so around here, that we do need to fold the fabric under. So I'm just going to clip a couple of times into there, one, so I can get nicely round that corner. And again, I don't want to go all the way up to the paper, but I want to have a nice edge that I can fold under, and you might need a couple of extra clips in that one to get a nice smooth curve there for your handle. Once you've got that all cut out, then we're going to glue it, and a glue stick is the handiest thing I've found to glue this down. What you need to be able to do is to glue on the edge of the paper, not too far in, but not right on the edge either. If you're gluing on the edge, keep in mind that when we're going to stitch our shape to our background fabric, we are going to be stitching through the edges. So if you haven't got any glue there, you won't run into any problems with your stitching. So just inside the edge if you can, and not too far in, because when you fold your fabric over, you want your fabric to be sitting on top of the glue. If you find you're gluing too far out, then your fingers will get gluey and you'll need a wipe to wipe him off. Not sure what I lost there, but I'll put those on there just while we glue this in place. I find it's much easier to glue just a little bit at a time, and if you hold it between your thumb and your forefinger, you'll feel the edge much better or much more easily, and you'll be able to keep a nice shape. So just little pinch and gather as we go round the corner, because we're going to try and get a nice smooth edge for that cup. Now there are other places where you're not going to be able to fold your fabric under, and that's really important that you sort of try not to force it, because if you're wanting to get nice sharp points, it's much easier to do that if you leave it with a tail, and I'll just show you that shortly when we get up to here. So just pinching and gathering around the corners, and remember, if you're finding it too hard to get that fabric in, it might be that it just needs a little bit trimming off it, so that it will go around that corner nice and smoothly. Try not to push your paper in as you press it down, because you're needing to keep that nice shape, that firm shape from the paper. Now when we get up to that corner at the top of the cup, what I'm going to do is fold. So I'm not going to fold the fabric in, I'm going to fold it so one side goes over the other. And what you'll notice, if I folded it like that, I've got a little bit that's sticking out, and I'll call that my tail, and we'll show you how to stitch that in underneath later on. It's not so vital with this cup that you get a nice point there, but it is really important if you're doing leaves or something like that and you want a nice sharp point on them. If you might be doing the teacup applique, not the teacup, the flower applique that I've got, you'll be doing leaves, and it's important then that you've got nice sharp points. So I don't know whether you can see them up close, but I do have a little tail sticking out on either side. Not a lot, just enough to get a nice sharp point then on those edges. And as I said, when we go to stitch, I'll show you how to push them under. So just make sure that you're happy then that you, with your bottom of your cup, you've got a nice smooth shape, and you can always pick up this fabric and reposition it if you feel that you're not happy with it. Take some time, don't rush. Sometimes in our classes they can feel a bit rushed, and you might not be entirely happy with what you've done. So just keep in mind that you can, particularly with this Soline glue stick, you can lift it up and reposition it as many times as you like until you get that nice smooth shape that you're looking for. So we'll go ahead then and we'll glue all our pieces down, the fabric over the shapes, and then we'll get on to the next step. Okay, so I've got all my pieces glued now. Fabric has turned over the edges of all the pieces of paper, and I'm reasonably happy with my shapes. Remembering that you don't need to turn under the ends of the handles. The other one that I have turned under but didn't need to is the bottom edge, whichever edge I decide is the bottom edge of the top of the cup. And that's because it's going to sit inside the cup like that. So the outside of the cup will sit over the top of it. So whichever way round I'd chosen for that to go, I could have, and I probably will still, just peel it back, that bottom edge of that piece if I can. It will just make it a slightly thinner layer. But yeah, certainly pieces that will sit under another one, you don't need to turn the edges under. What we're going to do now is to lay it onto our background fabric, just to lay it out, to see how it looks, and I'll show you how that will work. So if I pop it like that, you'll see how it's going to look when it's all together. I'm not going to start stitching that down now. Just turn it around and see from that side. I'm not going to start stitching that down now, and the reason for that is I'm going to do it in layers. So the heart I'm going to stitch to the cup first, and then because there's nothing underneath here, it doesn't matter whether I stitch the top to the cup first or the bottom of the cup to the saucer. But if there'd been something else that had sat underneath, I'd be doing them in layers. So the least amount of thickness that I've got to stitch through at one time will make the job easier for me. But the handle I'm not going to put on until the very end, and that's when I'm ready to stitch the whole thing to the background. So what I've used then is some Roxanne's glue, and I've got it in a little bottle here. If you don't have any basting glue, and that's all that this is, you can use it instead of pins. If you don't have any glue, then just use some pins or something else, but it will just hold it in place and make it easier for you to stitch. If you have a look at my tail, and once again it's very hard to see, but I do have where I folded under and got a nice point on the bottom of my heart, I've got this tail that's sticking out there. What I'm going to do when I start to stitch, and as I said, I've glued down, just put some dots of glue around there. When I've used the glue, I avoid putting any glue on the bottom of that heart. You'll see I can lift that up there. And the reason why I've done that is because when I'm stitching, I want to be able to tuck that tail in underneath. And if I put glue down near the bottom end of that tail, it would have made it too hard to have stuck in underneath. So in your kit then, I've given you a sample of the Wonderfil 80 weight thread, and it's a nice fine thread, so it will hide your stitches for you. And I've given you a size 10 applique needle, and I'm going to just put a nice size knot in that. If I don't put a decent knot in there, because it's so fine, when I pull it up through my fabric, it will just come all the way through. As I said, I've got my tail on my bottom of my heart, and my tail is sticking out there on the right side. Or is it the left side? But anyway, it's sticking out that side. Depends on which way you're looking at it, I suppose. I'm going to start stitching on the opposite side to where my tail is sticking out. So doesn't matter what you're stitching, you know, whether it's a leaf or something, it's going to be a lot easier for you if you start stitching opposite to where your tail is sticking out. Now we're coming up from the bottom, and if you think about your shape, you've got a side, you've got a bottom of your shape, which is underneath, and the top of your shape, but you've also got this tiny little piece, which is the side. What we're going to do is be coming up through the side of that shape. So we've caught the side coming up, and then we're going to put our stitch on the outside, but in the same area where we came up. So outside your shape, but it's effectively going up on the inside and down on the outside. Moving forward, and I will stitch towards myself, but moving forward and then coming up and going down. Now, as you get into the groove of things, you will be able to do that in one action. So going down, travelling along the bottom, and then just coming up through the side, and then back down. Coming back up through the side, and back down the outside. As I put my needle back down, I'm pointing it so it's heading underneath my little heart, and that will again also stop my stitches from being obvious on the side there. Now, as I folded the fabric over my heart, because we had that little sharp point in the middle that I had to snip into, you've got to be very just a little bit extra careful when you snip into that heart to, again, not, or try not to go all the way up to the paper, but you still want to get a nice sharp point on it. But as you turn your fabric under, make sure you've captured all of the edge. You don't want to have any little frayed edges sticking out, because sure as heck, when it comes time, you know, to wash it, that will be the section that it might begin to fray. So just going to keep going right around now till I get to that tail that's sticking out on this side. So I'm almost back there now to where my tail is sticking out, and just with the edge of the needle or my fingernail or whatever I've got, I'm going to tuck in it underneath. Now, remembering that I was very careful not to put any of the basting glue on that bottom edge of the tail, simply so that I had room where I could tuck that tail in underneath. Now, because I had stitched this right hand side first, when I tuck the tail in, it's not going to pop out on this side. It'll be stuck in well underneath there. So I'm just going to put in a few extra stitches on the bottom to make sure that tail's not going to pop out. It's a bit like a little fence garden gate. No tail is allowed to pop out. And then one just on the point there. Now, because you've done such beautifully fine stitches, you may find it difficult to see on the top where you've actually been around. But if you turn it over, because you've done all your travelling on the back, you'll be able to see the shape, the outline shape of your top piece. So you know that you've gone all the way around, and I'll just pop that through there and tie him off with a knot, popping it back through the loop. And snip off that edge. So what we're going to do now is, and again, completely up to you, but you can stitch your cup to your saucer and you choose where you want him to sit, wherever it looks right. And then this one round here. Now again, we're going to need to get some nice sharp points on here. So if I was doing this top piece, for example, I would stitch along here, and then that's closed off where those tails can pop out. So then when I end up doing the sides, I just will pop those in underneath. So I'll go ahead now and stitch those pieces together, and then we'll come back before I need to put the handle on. So I've finished stitching then this section onto my saucer and the inside to the back of the cup then. I've positioned it on my little piece of linen it down a bit, making sure that I leave enough for 1/4 inch seam allowance that will go on there, and also enough room to put my little lines of steam at the top of my cup then. What I need to do now is position my handle. So I'm going to put a few little dots of glue on that one. Remembering you don't need a lot, and I'm going to stick him in so he fits nicely under there. Making sure that I'm happy with that, and then I'll just give that a press, and the pressing up with the iron will set the glue. It will dry itself in about 15 minutes or so, maybe a bit quicker than that. Make sure I've got that so that I have got space, and again, I don't have a lot of my tail sticking out there, but when I stitch it down I do want to make sure that they all get tucked in underneath, so I'll make sure I've got room to do that. Yeah, and I've still got a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this side because I'll have my squares drawn onto there, so I might just need to move it over just a tad. Yeah, so when I've got that pressed then and the glue is set, I will stitch all the way around the outside, tucking in my tails as I go. The good thing, or the handy thing about the Roxanne's glue is that it's water soluble, which is the reason why we need to stitch it down and won't hold it permanently for us, but it's also easy to move. So once you've got it stuck down, if you're not happy with the position, it's easy enough just to pull it off and move it again. It's pretty handy like that. Okay, so I will finish now stitching this all the way around the outside because I've done the inside seams are already done. Just have to go around the outside now, including the handle. So finish stitching around my cup onto the background fabric, just around the outside edge of everything, and then around the inside of the handle and up the side of the cup there. Because we'd already stitched the pieces together. Once I did that, I started joining the 2.5 inch squares, and I just joined them together in pairs, and then I positioned them around my little square, 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top, and then I joined the other 2 pairs into groups of 4 and put them on the sides. Squared it up then and put the purlin on the back. Now the piece of purlin that you've got, you'll notice one side is almost bubbly, I suppose. That is the fusible side, so you'll just need to press that on. And I've left a little gap around the edge of the purlin because when I've done my 1/4 inch seam allowance to join it in, that will mean I won't have double the thickness in the seam allowance then. I've given you a couple of pieces of embroidery thread. This one is a single strand embroidery thread, and I usually just use a disappearing marking pen just to do a little few steam lines, and just use a back stitch to stitch those in. The other piece of thread, 1 or 2 pieces of thread I've given you, is a 6-stranded DMC thread. Just cut the length that you want. Normally I would say use a length, fingertip to elbow, and then you'll need to separate these out, either into 2 or 3 depending on how much stitching you'd like to do. I tend to do my quilting normally just while I've only got the purlin on the back, So in this one example, you can see I've got no stitching, quilting on the back there. This one I had put the back onto the front and then did the lines. Completely up to you which way you go. If you want to put backing fabric on now, just make sure it's cut to the same size as your top, and just with your 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew all the way around with right sides together, leaving a little opening. Then you would just snip across the corners and turn it the right side out. And then normally I would sew around, as you can see with this one, so I've enclosed the opening there as well. So with your DMC thread, once you've got your length cut, I just hold it between my thumb and my forefinger there and just pull out while you're holding it tight there. Just pull out a couple of strands that you're going to use, and you should be able to do that nice and easily. You need to separate those strands out and then put them back together before you go to use them, whether you're having 2 or 3. That will help to stop them from twisting on you. So that's basically the end of that. This little example, you'll notice that I did some blanket stitch on that one. I used exactly the same paper, it's just an alternative way to do it. You could do some blanket stitch, some turned edge stitch. The only difference is when you're using the paper, if you're just going to use a blanket stitch, just don't leave that 1/4 inch seam allowance outside the paper, because you won't need to turn it under. Cut your fabric back to the edge of the paper. And then I used same technique using the Roxanne's glue to baste it down, and then did the blanket stitch around. It's just an alternative. So yeah, thanks for joining me in that video. I hope that's been helpful for you. I hope that it's, if nothing else, it's motivation to get started doing some slow stitching. I hope to catch up with you again soon. Cheers.